Welcome to the Baunfire podcast. I am your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this week we'll be talking about Xbox interviews and shakeups, Nintendo's Direct, the Elden Ring DLC, and much more. Before we get started, subscribe to the Baunfire on your favorite podcast app and leave a review on Spotify or iTunes, or subscribe to the Bon Diesel YouTube channel to get all of my videos, including this podcast. Thank you to everyone who supports as YouTube members and Twitch subscribers. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and all of my other content, check out the link in the show description. You can also support the show by sharing my new episodes on any social media platforms you enjoy or hate, as well as sharing it with a friend. Why not? Bit of a slower week than the last few. It was quite a wild early June and late May with all the showcases, and now it's been a time for everything to kind of settle in, for everyone to forget the bad showcases, to make the good ones seem like they weren't as good as they were. But that's okay, that's the way it goes. Overall, I thought this was actually kind of a not great, like, non-E3 season, and I think it's really only kind of backed up how much, at least, I miss E3. I think I mentioned this recently, but it just all feels so disjointed. It's still super strange to me that Jeff Keighley promotes the whole couple weeks as like Summer Game Fest, when from what I remember, between the PlayStation, Nintendo, Xbox, Ubisoft, and then a bunch of smaller shows like the PC Gamer, Future Game Show, and all that. I believe one of the other shows, other than Summer Game Fest, even acknowledged Summer Game Fest. So there's this weird situation where Jeff is like trying to be like, this is all me and we're all in this together. And every single other showcase is just kind of like, nah, bro, like, no, we're kind of doing our own thing. But that's neither here nor there, I guess. It's just kind of strange. It's like, I don't know, just weird. But it really is. Like, I saw someone posted recently a schedule from like the 2016 E3 show, and it was like PlayStation Showcase at like noon, and then Xbox Showcase at like 4 p.m. And it was just like every day was like that. And then you also had like the show floor and all the reporting and stuff coming from that, not to mention all the rumors and leaks and everything that would come from, backdoor conversations and stuff. And we just don't have that anymore. So as much as the ESA sucks, and as much as we kind of lament a lot of that stuff, I really don't think that the whole, people say so often, like, I just don't think a show like that is viable anymore. And like, I disagree. And if anything, the last couple of years has shown that it probably would be viable. Maybe not as a consumer show. I don't know, even though that would probably be the most successful part. And when you see things like Gamescom and like PAX West is coming up and things like that, it certainly seems like that could be successful. It just, I don't know. It's kind of strange. And it leaves me kind of wanting more. But we'll see what happens. It seems like some of the platforms are still kind of carrying the E3 torch. And you have to remember, E3 didn't rule out a comeback still. The ESA still seems determined, though very likely the best thing they could do is not have anything to do with it. But we'll wait and see. We still have cool stuff coming up. Let's talk about some of the gaming news. First, we'll start off with Xbox, which is the bulk of this. And we have a Matt Booty interview with a Variety. Some of the big points that he made during this interview was that he feels like they're reaching kind of their long-term desired rhythm for releases, which, if you look at the next year or so, that makes sense. That he acknowledged that they are moving release dates around Grand Theft Auto 6, which I find interesting. If you remember, multiple shows or multiple games in the in the showcase were slated for 2025. And there's even a chance that some of them that didn't have dates are going to be slated for next year as well. And they're probably going to avoid that. So, kind of interesting on its own. That release rhythm is pretty important when you look at Game Pass and how viable Game Pass is going to be in the long run. Having Game Pass really only feels worth it if you're gonna play at least one new game a month on it, and that's how I look at it. If I'm not downloading a new game every month, then the timer starts to go down, and how many months until I'm not really. I would have been better off just buying the games. Now, to be fair, I've had Game Pass a long time, and it would be interesting to go back and see how many games I've played using it, because my guess is it's been a ton, and that it would take years and years and years of me paying for Game Pass where it would no longer feel like it was worth it. And the thing to remember is that, say Game Pass goes away, I can still go buy those games. And because of them having a good cloud save feature and all of that, I could go back and buy the game and all my stuff will be there, which is pretty cool, including over on PC for a lot of games. So that release rhythm is a big deal, and there's a reason he talked about it. He also talked a lot about how they're really integrating all the studios under their umbrella into sharing ideas and sharing like strategies and really in development. We're already hearing a lot about how Undead Labs, their State of Decay 3 has gotten help from the Grounded team over at Obsidian, from the Coalition, another Xbox studio that's very Unreal oriented, which I found really interesting. The Grounded team has helped them with multiplayer and things like that. This is a strategy you see used a lot with Ubisoft. You will see that now Ubisoft has straight up support studios. So Ubisoft has 30 plus studios or something, and there's only probably 10 that are mainline studios making actual games. And then you've got probably a good 20 plus who only exist for other reasons. Now I believe there's one studio that's focused on their PR and marketing and stuff, and but they have studios who all they do is support other games. A studio like Ubisoft Bucharest, they, even though they were making that Ghost Recon multiplayer game, as it was their game that got canceled, but they've helped out with the Division 2. I think they've helped out with Assassin's Creed and Far Cry and stuff like that. So when you see an Ubisoft credits, you'll often see a dozen studios that touched it at some point. And that's starting to be likely what Xbox is doing. When you have that many resources and that many people and that much technology knowledge, you use it, right? So hopefully it works out for them. And the consequence could be that we find that there's some redundancies, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. And hopefully that doesn't end up being too bad of a thing, but we'll wait and see. Once again, he's now the third of the three kind of executives at Xbox to be asked about and to touch on the Tinko Gameworks and Arcane Austin closures. This is strange to me because one, obviously it's fine to grill these guys about these big decisions they're making and have made that significantly impact people's lives and stuff. I think that's I think that's fair to do. But at some point you start to ask yourself, man, we sure don't see the continued grilling on PlayStation and, Ubisoft and EA and all of these others, at least not to this severity. So it's always kind of come off as a little bit strange to me that there isn't more consistency with that, but is what it is. What was interesting is, and I've seen a lot of reporting again, just like with Phil Spencer, just like with Sarah Bond. Oh, Matt Booty gave a non-answer, blah, blah, blah. I just don't, and I talked about it last week, so I won't go on too much about it again this week. But even what he said in this response, he kind of gave the line of these are hard decisions, blah blah blah. He did specifically say that they when they make these decisions, they're very much looking to the future and to see how viable these studios are in the future, and even kind of mentioned leadership and stuff. This is exactly what I've been saying. I even tweeted about it this week. Of course, no one cared, which is fine, but like Tango made Hi-Fi Rush, which was a really neat game, but it didn't sell very well. And even though he didn't probably have much to do with this game necessarily, the was the Miyazaki or whatever his name was, that left, who founded the studio, who's this legendary guy in the game industry because he, created Resident Evil, and when he left that studio, he founded it, and its name mattered because he was there. And that's not to degrade the devs who were there and who did the bulk of the work and everything, especially in Hi-Fi Rush. But that matters. And, maybe, through meetings and so on, they kind of just didn't feel like who had taken over, who was in charge there now, was really doing it for them. They were talking, it's been talked about how GhostWire Tokyo 2 was probably their next game, even though the first game was pretty much a dud. And then that maybe they were going to do a Hi-Fi Rush 2, but then you have to acknowledge that that game probably didn't even sell very well, even though it was critically amazing, which I loved it. Honestly, I didn't finish it, though, if I have to be straight up. And then it was a similar issue with Arcane Austin. There were plenty of stories about how during the development of Redfall, probably because it wasn't the type of game they normally make, they lost a bunch of senior developers. And so, what remained of Arcane Austin wasn't the Arcane Austin who hadn't really made a hit game in over 10 years anyways. And so this isn't to degrade those studios. I'm sure the people there are awesome, do great work. I hope they all do really good things moving forward. But there's this weird obsession with going after Xbox about these closures. And in my opinion, Xbox and the executives who keep getting asked about it are trying to be like cool and not just come out and say like they didn't have any value. And so we got rid of them. They had no future value. Because you don't want to do that. You don't want to add insult to injury. You don't want to twist the knife. But more and more, it seems like that was probably what was going on, as I've speculated previously. So this is going to keep coming up. But then if they just said that, then it would turn into a whole different storm of drama. It just, Xbox continues its whipping boy position. And unfortunately, that's not probably going to go anywhere anytime soon. And obviously, even the big, pretty showcase didn't change that. He wrapped up the interview or also talked about how he was pleased with multi-platform releases, but they're still doing those case by case, and that exclusives will continue to be a thing, and that the Xbox console is still their focus as a brand. This shouldn't be surprising, even though you have all these PlayStation influencers. Every time Xbox has an announcement, doing the whole like, "Oh, I can't wait to play this on the PlayStation." The fact is that the only game that they've done multi-platform so far that's done well is Sea of Thieves. Grounded did okay, and Pentiment and Hi-Fi Rush did nothing. And so it seems likely that the long-term multi-platform strategy is probably going to be multiplayer games. It seems unlikely that they're going to be really focusing on single player. Now, it's likely they'll try to do more single player games before they give up on that. Because Hi-Fi Rush, being very critically awesome, still wasn't like a big blockbuster game. Pentiment is an insanely niche game. So we're going to see what happens with, games like Doom, the Dark Ages. There's always rumors swirling about games like Indiana Jones, Starfield, some other ones as well, potentially becoming or going over to PlayStation. Like I said last week, I've kind of come out and come to the conclusion of like, if PlayStation gamers want to subsidize my Game Pass, that's no problem with me. Cool. Enjoy. They're cool games. So, very curious to how this plays out in the long run. We also had an interview this week with that came out or in the last week with Todd Howard, with Mr. Maddie Plays. I'll address that at the end. Basically, Todd came out and said that there's no rush to get a new Fallout a new Fallout game out, despite the kind of rumors and assumptions that that is what they're doing. I still wouldn't be surprised if another studio comes out with a Fallout game sooner than later, but we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. He also said that there's no end in sight for Fallout 76, which makes me feel like I'm taking crazy pills because I swear that in the last couple of years there was like an official communication that, yeah, okay, we're gonna be wrapping up Fallout 76, and maybe that did happen, or maybe it was rumors. I can't remember now. But obviously, the resurgence of that game, it probably isn't going anywhere anytime soon, for better or worse. He did confirm that there's basically no chance of a reimagining or remake or anything of Fallout 1 and 2 happening. He kind of basically said, like, yeah, those games are, time. You have to remember they didn't make those games. Bethesda came in with Fallout 3. Obsidian, ironically, or at least the old Obsidian, made the first two games. And so maybe they will remake those, even though I highly doubt it. He did say that Bethesda games had over 25 million players just last month. Pretty big deal for them. And confirmed, or at least said, that there should be annual story DLC or story updates for Starfield, which is really exciting to me. I love the story of that game. And obviously mods and stuff from, like, I don't really like to do the big like game changing mods. I'm definitely more of like a quality of life modder. So getting actual like Bethesda story that's like canon into this game is really exciting because people have lots of thoughts and qualms with Starfield, but I loved it, and I wanted to keep going. He even did mention during this though that their pillar games are Elder Scrolls, Fallout, and he said Starfield. So it may not be until I'm like in a old folks home, but we will probably get a Starfield 2 one day, which is really exciting for me. I have no love lost for Mr. Matty Plays. I think he's one of the most sensational clickbaiting content creators out there. I know he's been doing it forever. He's well established. From the response to this interview, people apparently love him. I exist in such a small like echo chamber in my own brain of like, I see this guy's videos pop up all the time, and he's just, in my opinion, playing the YouTube game and being hyper clickbaity and not very informative most of the time. Obviously, this interview was pretty good. He's also on an Xbox podcast for Last Stand Media or whatever with Colin Moriarty. And he like seemingly hates Xbox, even though he's on their podcast. And another guy on the podcast seems like the only person in that whole company who even likes Xbox a little bit. I don't really like Mr. Matty Plays. Not as a person, I don't know him, but I don't like the persona or the content. And it blew my mind that people were so pumped about this. It was kind of surprising. Seems like he's been doing it a long time. He's earned the respect of a lot of people. So this is a me problem, I guess. But I kind of was surprised by I didn't realize so many people liked him because I don't see him any different of any of the other clickbait sensational YouTubers and stuff, but maybe I'm the one who's wrong. Who knows? It was announced this week, kind of officially and unofficially, that Chief Marketing Officer Jarrett West of Xbox, who came to them from Netflix 4 years ago, is leaving. He's going to be the Roblox marketing guy. This is probably a good thing. If you think about how, my honest argument is that I believe Xbox has good hardware. I think it has really good like infrastructure when it comes to their online systems and their UI and a lot of their background stuff. They have good hardware. They have good software. They have great games, both their own and third party. Game Pass is, kind of not really even challenged by anything else, at least in my opinion. And they do an awful job of selling themselves and their products. It's insane, especially because they are like fairly active and like communicating, but it's so bad, and they just get their butts wiped or kicked. Maybe wiped isn't the right word. by PlayStation, who literally basically doesn't communicate at all, you know, because they don't need to. That's what happens when you have a customer base that's, 3 times bigger. But like, interesting. I hope this is a good thing because this generation, I don't, I genuinely don't believe that, at least as it stands today, the two consoles are really, one's really any better than the other. They have their ups and downs and their pros and cons, but I think you could make an argument that they're pretty much on the same level at this point. But one has sold twice as much, and that's a lot because of early gen game releases and stuff. They did a great job. But I also think it's in part because Xbox just doesn't sell itself well, like not even a little bit. And I don't think they have anyone to blame but themselves for that kind of thing. But this guy probably, his strategy just didn't work, and there's probably a reason he's leaving. This led to a bunch of shakeups. So an email got leaked or was released that Phil Spencer had sent the entire Xbox team, basically reassigning a bunch of so I tried to decipher this. Maybe I can try to find someone else who's done it better. But basically, it looks like they're consolidating their marketing a lot from Bethesda and from Xbox, and I assume ABK as well, which would be great because whether you like ABK or not, Activision Blizzard King, their marketing is super good. If you think about the advertising for Call of Duty and stuff, they are very good at what they do, even if you don't like that product. And so the more they pull them in, I think the more that they bring it together and really start selling Xbox. Because like that's the thing, is that we get these statements about Game Pass and all this stuff, but it just never feels like Xbox like sells itself. And they need to. Maybe PlayStation doesn't really do that either, but they don't have to, obviously. Nintendo definitely doesn't have to. They sell 150 million units of bags of farts if they wanted to, right? But Xbox needs to sell itself with the position they're in, and they don't try, or at least they haven't, right? And so I'm really hoping that all these mix-ups and some new leadership is going to lead to a better message, even if it feels like bullcrap. Like, because the thing is that a good marketing campaign will probably be cringe to people like me and people listening to this podcast, people who are more enthusiasts or whatever of gaming. But we are such a tiny part of the consumer base. I just don't think they sell themselves very well to that like 95% of potential consumers. So hopefully, we get that. That would be really good for the brand. And when I talk about this stuff and when I talk about wanting Xbox to be better and stuff, I don't want Xbox to be better and PlayStation to like fail or Nintendo to fail. One, they're not going to. They're extremely strong brands that do many things extremely well. I want Xbox to push them. I want Xbox to get to the point where maybe they aren't bigger than those, but they are much more competitive with them, because we need, especially PlayStation, to have competition. And that'll be good from a third-party perspective for everybody. And it will push them even internally to hopefully do things better and try to be more competitive and stop doing so much weird stuff. PlayStation does so much weird stuff. And it's like, it doesn't matter because they're such a juggernaut in the space. But they do so much weird stuff, anti-consumer stuff, and just weird stuff. So, hopefully, this is a good thing for Xbox. We'll have to wait and see. And then we get into the speculation or the conspiracy theory Xbot version part of this podcast, where first I talk about Xbox responded or had a quote talking about why Black Myth Wukong will not be on their system day one. So the quote says, "We can't comment on the deals made by our partners with other platform holders." This was implying that the game isn't going to be with them day one because of a deal made with another platform, obviously implying PlayStation. And this was interesting because, just a few days or a week or so ago, the developers of Black Myth Wukong came out and said that they were having hardware difficulties with Xbox and they needed more time to optimize the game. That's why it's not coming out day one. So this goes back into that conversation about the Series S holding games back and so on and so forth. This comes at the same time as the situation that we have with Capcom not releasing a bunch of these old games that they've updated and put on the new systems. It's on PlayStation, it's on Nintendo Switch and PC, but it's not on Xbox. That was initially thrown out there as a not PlayStation or a Series S thing, but more of a there's not enough PlayStations. These Capcom's not going to put their games out on Xbox because there's not enough Xboxes out there, which is just there's 30 plus million. That's a very healthy consumer base to sell to. So any rumors that are based around like not enough Xbox customers is silly. Now, if the rumors are that they don't buy enough games straight up, which still isn't very true, it sounds like actually Xbox gamers buy a lot of games, but they buy them digitally, which isn't tracked very well. All of this stuff is interesting because the Capcom stuff has come down to they're basing these updated games on infrastructure that doesn't work on Series S or X. It's this MT and tech or something. I don't expect me to explain it perfectly, but long story short, even the PlayStation version of these games that Capcom's putting out is actually a PlayStation 4 version that is just compatible with 5. This is interesting to me because it's one of these situations where apparently because of the way that the Play Anywhere, the cross-gen system works with the series consoles actually makes this not work because it's not compatible. And that's a Capcom thing. Like they chose not to use this old tech that doesn't work even on the PS5, where they can't make a native version for it either. And that's a them thing. But of course it gets blamed on whatever Xbox thing. This Black Myth Wukong situation is awkward because Xbox comes out and straight up has a quote that says, "We can't comment on the deals made by our partners with other platform holders," even though the devs have said that they're still optimizing. Now, do the devs have any reason to lie? Probably not, but that doesn't mean it's a lie. They probably are still optimizing it for the Xboxes. They're probably also still optimizing it for PlayStation and for PC. So them saying that isn't a lie. They're doing that, but it's probably not the complete truth because it is likely because PlayStation does this all the time where they make deals and they say they get 6 months exclusivity. Xbox does this too. I would argue that more often it's pretty obvious or even it's just plain stated when Xbox is doing it. It seems like it's always done a little more silently by PlayStation. And it's in the current climate is always going to be portrayed as, well, there's something wrong with Xbox, when really this is pretty much just business as usual, where these games are putting out their games on one platform before the other because one of the platforms decided to spend more. There are more factors. There's twice as many PlayStation 5s as series consoles. So if say Xbox and PlayStation are offering you the same money, taking PlayStation makes sense to do exclusivity. There's also the factor, and this is an interesting conversation I stumbled upon on social media, is people saying like, well, hey, Xbox is this way bigger company, or Microsoft is way bigger than Sony. Why can't they just outspend them? And that is a misunderstanding of how corporations work. Yeah, Microsoft is hilariously bigger than Sony. Could just buy Sony. Not, they couldn't really. It would never pass regulators. But money-wise, they could buy them. I think it's like 10 times over. The money they have on hand, or at least what they, could muster up compared to what Sony's worth. That they could buy multiple times over. But PlayStation probably has a bigger operating budget than Xbox, or at least is just as big. But I would imagine they have more money to throw around. So when these things happen, and because they can get more return on investment, right? So, say, Xbox can spend more, they won't get as much return on that money, almost certainly, where PlayStation can spend more. And yeah, it may not be as easy for them to do it because their parent company isn't as big, but because they have twice as many consoles out there, they're almost certainly going to get a better return out of it. So this is interesting. We'll probably never know the truth about this situation. I highly, highly doubt the Wukong developers are going to comment on this. One, because there's probably an NDA, and two, because it really wouldn't help them. My whole thing is that I do think it's weird that they just like cited hardware limitations. They didn't call out the Series S, even though that's what's implied. And I think that either way, they probably are best just not saying anything. At the end of the day, no one's going to care. What I think is interesting is it would probably behoove this developer to take money from one of the platforms, because I don't expect this game to be a big like 10 million copy seller. Like, this was probably an expensive game to make. It also seems like a game I see 10 times a year. Like, I think it's funny that everyone's getting their panties in a bunch about it, because literally when I was typing up the notes for this, I was confused with this game and like 6 other games that have come out in the last couple of years that all have that same like kind of general feel and kind of look the same. So they don't all have a monkey man, but you know what I mean. So interesting times, but I will always assume the simplest answer, but it is fun to explore the more interesting ones. For some PlayStation news, just some quick ones here. Sony Rewards is shutting down after a couple weeks of just not working. This was a strange one. I saw people talking about this. This program doesn't seem like it was all that popular, and I don't think anyone really cares that much about this. I saw some people griping that there's rewards that they can't cash out, which sucks. But apparently PlayStation has this, reward system and it just hasn't worked for a couple weeks, and they're just going to shut it down. So either they always intended on shutting it down and something just went wrong, or something broke so badly in it that they just realized it's not recoverable. So they're just getting rid of it, which is interesting. There's a rumor going around that Sony is cutting funding for the PSVR 2 and any titles they're making for it, and that right now there might only be 2 games being made for it, and there's some concern whether they will even see the light of day. It doesn't seem like it's any secret at this point that Sony isn't really backing up the PSVR 2. It's strange. It's very weird. It's probably more of a sign that VR just still isn't really that big of a deal, at least not to most people. And putting a bunch of money in the games when, we're starting to see these, their games that actually make money are getting more and more expensive, and it's harder and harder to actually make money with those games. It doesn't surprise anyone that all of the publishers are probably tightening their purses a little bit, and VR probably just isn't going to be a priority for any of them anytime soon. We also found out that there is a new Uncharted sequel movie coming out or being made or in the works. So we'll see about that. Nintendo had a direct. Not a big Nintendo fan. Full clarity there. This showcase was great though. It was really good simply because if you consider that this is literally it's a 2017 system that is running on like 2015 like tablet tech, and the games don't look great, and they don't run very well, but it doesn't matter. These people don't care, and all the power to them. Kind of the way I have refused to ever play a game over 60 FPS, because I don't want to see 144, because once I see 144, then 60 is not going to look good anymore. And so I can't do it. I stay away from it, and I still do to this day, even though I have a system that can do way better in 60 FPS. They had a Zelda game where you actually play as Zelda, which was very interesting. And it is cool because instead of like fighting with swords and shields, like with Link, Zelda like conjures up objects and enemies that she's defeated to solve puzzles and defeat enemies. It's a really cool. It looked like a really cool game. The heralded Metroid Prime 4 was finally shown. This game, I believe, was first teased like 7 years ago, and it's finally coming out here at the end of this generation. It will probably be a cross-gen game. This game was funny because it looks pretty good for a Switch game, and like it looks like a 360 game. Like that may not be fair, but I think people are being very generous with their compliments for how that game looked. But it doesn't matter because it's probably going to be a ton of fun and people are going to love it. Now, that said, I am under the impression as outside observer that Metroid games, like Metroid has so many fans and none of them buy the games. So I'm under the impression that Metroid games always have all this hype. People are always like asking for them or so excited when they get announced, and then they never sell well. So I'm curious to what happens here with this one. And then they showed a bunch of other stuff. There's a lot of remakes and stuff like that, and games that they're bringing up from their library as well. So this is probably the last big Nintendo show with no mention of the next hardware, and it was a pretty good one to go out on. So good for them. It also was found, or is now known, that the next Mario movie is expected for April 2026. If you haven't seen the first one, I thought it was great. I thought it's a ton of fun. My kid loves it. I like watching it. It's very pretty. It's a gorgeous movie. Like the design and all the references are great. Everyone hates Chris Pratt as Mario. I thought he did a really good job. I thought he did fine. I had no problem at all. It was actually Charlie Day as Luigi that I couldn't stand. I get it, and he actually fits the character okay, but I just can't stand that dude's voice. So, call me a contrarian. Moving to regular game news, we have the Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. It has a Metacritic score of 95. This is going to be, if this isn't the year that a game DLC wins Game of the Year, I doubt it ever happens, at least at like the big shows. I think it's weird. This is going to be a weird year for this stuff. So, I believe, I think that we're going to see later in the year, we're going to see maybe Star Wars Outlaws, probably maybe Assassin's Creed Shadows, probably not. Maybe Dragon Age. We're going to see some big games come out late this year that are going to make an argument to be Game of the Year. My Game of the Year right now is Hellblade 2. I really hate the discussion that happened around that game, where people genuinely or not kind of did some weird stuff with their expectations for that game and things like that. I don't know. Like Helldivers 2, I see mentioned by people. That game is very cool. After the third or fourth week of doing the exact same thing every time, though, and the stratagems and the updates not really being that interesting, and the story kind of not going anywhere, even though that was fun for a little while, I don't even know if that game will make my top 5 this year. But still, it's going to be interesting. People are going to fight. I think Erdtree's probably going to win Game of the Year, at least like for Jeff Keighley's show and probably some of the big ones. I don't get it. I'm not a Souls game guy. I'm not a From Software guy. I've dabbled and I've played a few of these games, and I just can't. I can't get into it. I get frustrated too. It's a me problem. Obviously, Elden Ring is amazing. Let me be very clear that I'm not doubting how good that game is. But man, I have no desire to frustrate myself on purpose. Maybe my most controversial opinion is I think that game is ugly as sin. I think many or most of the NPC and character designs are just ugly, and not in the way of they're supposed to be kind of grotesque, and I don't mean like that. I straight up think the models and the textures look stupid. Like they look bad in my opinion. I have seen some insane environmental design and aesthetic from it, where it has moments of beauty for sure, but I don't know. I just find the game to be very ugly, and I'm a big aesthetics guy. I like playing games that look pretty, and Elden Ring just doesn't do it for me. But it's like 95%. I don't want to get mad while playing games, so I'll take this one as an L for me. This is obviously a great game, and it's cool to see it doing well and people excited about it, having a good time. Beyond Good and Evil. That's a thing you haven't heard in a while. They have a 20th anniversary of the original game being released, and they announced that it's going to have new content in it that is going to link it to the next game, to the sequel, which was first announced literally like 12 years ago. What's so wild about Beyond Good and Evil 2 is it was initially announced with a CG trailer like 10 plus years ago. I went to E3 in 2018 to see the reveal of The Division 2, amongst other things. And they reintroduced Beyond Good and Evil 2 at that show and had a big production of having the lead developers come out. Gordon Levitt came out and introduced this thing where they were going to have you make art for the game and then like maybe pay you for it. It was kind of a shady situation, and I'm pretty sure that project is very dead at this point. But yeah, so this implies that that game, and we've heard relatively recently that Beyond Good and Evil 2 is still in development, but this is implying or basically guaranteeing in some capacity that it's still a thing. It's still happening, because why would they put content into a 20-year-old game if they weren't really putting out the sequel it's going to link it to? Crazy. Crazy. We'll see. Speaking of From Software, Miyazaki states that he would never do layoffs as long as he's in charge there. Obviously a good statement. There has been an interesting thing about like the Japanese studios where, during all this turmoil everywhere else, I believe that there's been a bunch of announcements of a bunch of Japanese studios like raising their minimum wage, not doing any layoffs. Like Nintendo, as far as I know, hasn't shut down a studio in like 5 years, and that was not really their studio. It was a weird situation. So whether it's like labor laws that prevent some of that kind of behavior, or there's other reasons behind it, maybe it's cultural, maybe it's business practices, I don't know. This doesn't seem that surprising. I think when you throw this out, you're kind of being like, yeah, Xbox and all these other people are laying people off and we don't have to. That's like kind of a rich thing to say from a studio who's making like one game at a time, probably 2 or 3, but he's not carrying the same weight or the same responsibilities as the people he's kind of throwing shade at. But that's fine. It's a good message. I hope he's right. I hope they never do lay people off. I don't want anyone to get laid off, no matter how much of a apologist I know I come off as sometimes. So really, really good statement. Obviously, how can you argue against that? Kind of a, easy one to make though, but that's fine. Speaking of that, Embracer shut down another studio. The Embracer Group continues to be the worst publisher ever created, at least in my opinion. And they shut down Pieces Interactive, the makers of Magicka and the Alone in the Dark reboot. I've heard of the reboot, and it looked awful, in my opinion. I've heard of Magicka, couldn't tell you a single thing about it, but that doesn't change how much this sucks and is no good. In other super fun news, we found out this week that EA executives earned over $60 million in 2023. CEO Andrew Wilson made over $25.5 million of that. Also, by the way, they laid off 5% of their workforce last year. Obviously, that all sucks, right? That said, here comes the contrarian or the apologist. Corporation CEOs at corporations make tons of money. Do they deserve it? Probably not. But this isn't unique to gaming. This isn't unique to EA. This is just capitalism at work, and that's a whole different discussion to have that I'm not smart enough to really have any deep thoughts on. My only issue here is that you see a lot of talk of like, well, if they took half of that compensation, they still would have made 30 million last year. Andrew Wilson would have still made, 12.5 million last year. Like, when is enough enough? The thing is that at least my understanding is say they did that, say they paid the executives 30 million less last year. There is basically zero chance that would have saved any of those jobs. It's just not how this stuff works. It would have gotten paid back in stock dividends or something. I'm not going to pretend like I understand all that stuff. But what I do understand, or at least have the inclination of, is Like I remember seeing a story about how some Japanese dev, the CEO took like a $200,000 pay cut, or only got paid that much, or he took some huge pay cut, and instead of laying people off. Obviously a cool gesture. Maybe that is why they didn't lay people off. But with these super crazy giant corporations, it's just different pots of money. And it's just not how it really works. And it sucks, and it's gross, and it's the worst. But it's just, at least the impression I always get when these discussions come up is that this is like feel good material for us gamers to be like, yeah, F Andrew Wilson, which like F Andrew Wilson for sure. But like F those guys, they should have gotten paid less and those people wouldn't have lost their jobs. And that probably wasn't why they laid those people off. There were probably other reasons. None of them good, likely. They probably all sucked as well. But again, I just think that sometimes people get kind of lost, and we don't really understand it. Anyone listening to this, me and my big dumb face, like, we don't know why they did the things they did, why they laid people off, why they pay these people so much, why they shut down studios, why they do this, why they shut down games. All of that, we don't understand. We can speculate, we can guess, but no one who's in our sphere has enough info to really understand. Everyone always goes to the easiest answers. They're greedy, they're lazy, they're this, they're that, they're stupid, whatever. None of those things are probably true. They made decisions that to them make sense, and we just don't like them. And those can both be true. So it all sucks. That's the end of the podcast. So no wonder my podcast is losing listenership. Oh my God, it's so depressing. But it's okay, because you made it to the end, and I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Please consider supporting all of my content by watching, listening, sharing, and following my socials, or throwing a few bucks my way at the link in the show description, which has all of my content and links in it. That is all I have for this episode of the Baunfire podcast. So until next time.